Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Clockwork Game Dev Show. My name is Keith Burgun. It is good to have you here. We haven't had a proper Clockwork Game Dev Show in a while because I've been doing so much Gem Wizards Tactics, but I thought it was important to keep it going. So we have a show today for you about roguelikes. So I'm excited to talk to people about roguelikes. I guess I can talk first about my history with roguelikes. Of course, I made a roguelike. My history with roguelikes. The ones that I've played the most of DCSS, Sheeran. What else? Actually, weirdly enough, a game called Powder was my first roguelike. It was not a very popular roguelike, but I played a lot of it. And what else was a roguelike that I played a lot of? Played a decent amount of Rogue. Obviously 100 Rogues. Decent amount of Rogue. What else? A little Brogue. God, I gotta look up the list of roguelikes. Well, so yeah, Rogue Light. We'll talk about that. So I'll make a title for this: Roguelikes and Rogue Lights. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. Angband, barely. I played a tiny bit of. Played a tiny bit of Sword of Fargle. I think I had Glenn Wickman on my podcast at one point, if I'm not mistaken. Who designed the original Rogue. It's been a while. Like I can't actually remember if I did or not. But yeah, it's funny. My first roguelike was actually Powder. And I didn't know, I hadn't heard of, I found Powder randomly, forget how, and I started playing it, and yeah, actually, man, now I wish I could remember, okay, I remember there was this game, it was like a web game that I would play, this was back in like the early 2000s, where you had like a grid and you had like a party and you would walk around and it was a randomly generated map. It wasn't a roguelike exactly, but it was like very quick and you would move around on this randomly generated map with this party and like, you know, combat would like auto resolve and stuff, but it kind of was a roguelike because you would get like these random encounters and random like boosts and whatever. And I can't remember what those were called, but I wonder if they'd be on this website, on Wikipedia's page. Oh, Doom RL. Actually, I played a good amount of Doom RL again. Yeah. What is this? Parallels that of Doom Clone. Oh, okay. Right. More generic first-person shooter. I mean, I think Doom Clone was like kind of a better term, but it's okay. NetHack, of course, obviously. So I never got super into NetHack because I thought NetHack was a little bit intimidating. So I played a little bit of it, but I didn't really dive super hard into it. John Harris of Gameset Watch, boom. He comes by our Discord sometimes. But yeah, so when I got really into roguelikes, this would be around 2009 or so, 2010, when I was starting to work on 100 Rogues. I was like, I need to learn as much as I can about roguelikes as fast as I can. And so I became friends with John Harris, who because of his Gameset Watch articles, which were very good. So let's talk about what is a roguelike. I just wanted to give some background on myself and, you know, my history with roguelikes. Really, the main ones that I played the most of were DCSS, Sheeran, and 100 Rogues, obviously. And then I played a little bit of a bunch of others. Adam, Sword of Fargle. I think I played some... What was that one that was like graphical that got pretty good? Like Dungeons of Dreadmore, I think. Yeah, so I played a bunch of roguelikes, but really it was DCSS and Sheeran. Those were my favorites, and 100 Rogues. I don't remember if I played Tome, the Middle Earth one. I think I must have, but I don't remember it. So I don't think I played it very much, but I am aware of it. Yeah. Now Lindley's Dungeon Crawl, I think, is the same thing as Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. It became Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Dungeon Crawl is interesting because, and that's our new book club game, but Dungeon Crawl is really interesting because it actually has like a 30-year. It's like 20 or 30 years old at this point. I wonder if there's a website for or like a page for that. Yeah, this might have the history of it. 1997 roguelike, Lindley's Dungeon Crawl. Right. So 1997, so that's 23 years. Crazy, right? And it's been, you know, it's been in so many people's hands over that time. So it really has changed a lot, obviously, since the beginning. But when I got into DCSS, the designer was David, I guess it's pronounced David Plogue. And I had him on my podcast also because he was the one who added like a philosophy section to Dungeon Crawl, to like the help section. This is what it looked like when I played it. I don't know what it looks like now. But yeah, he added like a philosophy section. I found that so inspiring. List of roguelikes. Here we go. Are there roguelikes for... I thought I saw NES. I don't think there are any for NES. So let's see. Which of these have I played? I might have played Hack briefly. I definitely played NetHack. What else? Angband. This looks familiar, but I don't think I've played it. Oh wait, what was Zangband again? Interesting. Okay. Huh. Sheeran the Wanderer, amazing. The best one. Also the one I played the most of, though, so a little bit of bias there. Azure Dreams, I forgot about this one. This one was weird. This one was like a graphical roguelike. Yeah, you played as like this ninja, I think. It wasn't very good from what I remember, but... Or wait, there's a couple of weird graphical roguelikes actually for the DS. Powder was actually my first roguelike I ever played. Very weird, very random. Now they're calling Dwarf Fortress a roguelike. I don't know if I would agree with that. I think that, honestly, if Dwarf Fortress had had graphics from the beginning, no one would have called it a roguelike. I know it has the adventure mode, but even that's not really a roguelike. Is it really a roguelike? I mean, I feel like roguelikes are actually quite, like, linear and goal-oriented, and, you know, adventure mode to me struck me as just very, you're not in a dungeon, you're just, like, walking around, and you're just, like, it's like a world exploration tool. But maybe. I guess it's arguable that it could be. Izuna was the game I was talking about. Izuna, yeah, I played this one. This one was not very good. But it was a DS roguelike. And a lot of these roguelike games, especially when they came to consoles, you know, like the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and stuff like that, would start having basically roguelike dungeons as like the JRPG combat system, and they're really just JRPGs, so they don't have permadeath or anything like that. And they just take the combat system from roguelikes and the random map generation, which is like not that great of a thing to take. So it's like a lot of times, like, so I actually recently have been playing Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, the re-release for the Switch, and it's just like really tedious to play. Because the roguelike combat system, it's like I almost wish like this was just a JRPG and I could just like mash fight. But we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah, I just wanted to like get an overview of the kinds of games that are listed. Yeah, this is the one that I played. So Etrian Mystery Dungeon. Oh, weird. I don't think I knew about this. I gotta listen to the soundtrack of this because Etrian Odyssey has amazing music, and Mystery Dungeon games generally have very good music, especially when they are done by the Dragon Quest composer, as Sheeran is. Okay, so anyways, roguelikes. What are roguelikes? So we can go, there's this whole Berlin interpretation thing. This is Rogue Basin. I think this is like kind of like pretty widely accepted, at least within the roguelike community, as like a good definition for traditional roguelikes. Let's see. Roguelike refers to a genre, not merely like rogue. That's something that I don't personally like very much. Yeah, I whatever. The genre is represented by its canon. That's a weird sentence. The canon for roguelikes is okay. So these games are like Rogue, though. Okay, whatever. This list can be used to determine how roguelike a game is. Okay, fine. So missing some points does not mean the game is not a roguelike. Yeah, sure, all right. So now all these, any effort like this is always going to be like incomplete and, you know, highly subjective and all that. But random environment generation. Game world is randomly generated. I agree with that. Permadeath. You're not expected to win the game with your first character. There's kind of weird stuff going on with this, for sure. But yes, this is definitely a real thing. You start over from the first level when you die. It is possible to save games, but the save file is deleted upon loading. Meaning that you can just like save and exit, basically. The random environment makes this enjoyable rather than punishing. Oh. Turn-based. Each command, yeah, turn-based. Yeah, citation needed on that. How's it going, Pete Potato? Or I should say, Pete Potato, how's it going, boy? That's your greeting that you've earned. Turn-based, grid-based, non-modal. Movement, battle, and other actions take place in the same mode. So not having several screens, right? Like a combat screen or something like that. Complexity. The game has enough complexity to allow for several solutions to common goals. This is a little bit weird, the non-modal thing, because actually the UI in most roguelikes, you could argue, is like its own weird little thing, but maybe not. I don't know. Complexity. Enough complexity to allow several solutions to common goals. And this is something that makes them like decently good toys and also kind of like have a lot in common with strategy games. So roguelikes, the reason that they're important to me and interesting to me is that, like, as a person who wants to make single player strategy games, roguelikes are one of the main examples out there of games that are kind of in that vein. That are kind of like in that, like, they definitely set me down that course between games like 4X kind of games, and also, you know, designer Euro games that have single player modes. Roguelikes have been majorly foundational in my like, you know, helpful in my understanding of like kind of what I've always wanted out of video games. You know, video games. So when I found out about roguelikes, which was around 2008-ish, 2009, I was like, oh my god, yes, this is nodding in a direction that I want games to go in. But it's only nodding. It's only just like slightly nodding in the same way that Civ is nodding, or things like that. They're just like sort of leaning in this direction of creating this little machine that has all this emergent complexity possibilities to it, and it's single player, and that's, you know, because we have a lot of those kinds of games in the multiplayer space, but in single player it's a lot more rare that you have that kind of attempt made. Resource management. You have to manage your limited resources. Hack and slash, killing monsters. Exploration and discovery. Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, yeah, we kind of understand what traditional roguelikes are. Does this have anything else to say? ASCII display. Obviously, that's not important to us. Single character. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon kind of violates that, and it gets really messy really fast. All right, so what do we think about roguelikes? What's like what is the core essential thing about roguelikes? So I would come out and say, like, roguelikes, while they like nod in the direction of a single player strategy game, they are totally gambling. They are totally they're just as sort of like Skinner boxy as like Diablo. And in fact, Diablo was based on roguelikes. And originally was, in fact, originally Diablo was going to be turn-based, and it was going to be like a graphical, high production value roguelike. And people sort of have a good sense of what Diablo is, I think. But I don't think that they have that same sense about roguelikes necessarily. And I think that the part of that is because maybe roguelikes, you know, they're not commercial games. So let's talk about roguelikes. Qualities of roguelikes, because there's a lot of cool things to talk about. Skinner box. The main driving factor, you know, the main like sort of the main property making these systems compelling is, you know, the random reward schedules. Having trouble typing today. Getting presents from Santa. In the form of loot. I'll just write loot. Okay, so that to me is the most important central thing about what roguelikes are, which also is, you know, is their main limiting factor, really, too. So, but another thing about roguelikes that's interesting is that that I want to talk about before I forget to talk about it is the fact that they're largely non-commercial games. That's a really interesting thing about them. That is quite different from a lot of other kinds of games, maybe any other genre that we could think of. Like, can we think of another genre that is so heavily based in a non-commercial like mode of production? You know, people make roguelikes and they just put them on the internet. And for the most part, I mean, there are commercial roguelikes for sure, but some of the biggest ones have never been for sale, and that is like really amazing, actually. Like, when you think about that, that's like, it feels like almost like revolutionary, you know. And I think that that's probably part of. I think that I remember that we originally, with 100 Rogues, we had this programmer that we were working with, and he was one of these like open source, like a zealot about open source, you know. You can be like a coder guy and make a really complicated game, and it's okay to be pure ASCII. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it too. The ASCII is part of the sort of like aesthetic, you know, clothing or whatever that like that the ASCII sort of like screams, I'm not a commercial product. Says very loudly, I am not a commercial product, right? And I actually think this is part of their appeal because, like, you know, in the same way that we talked about Dark Souls and how Dark Souls was a response and a reaction to what was happening in console games in terms of everything becoming super easy and super, you know, linear and sort of mainlined, and like Universal Studios ride guaranteed experiences, and Dark Souls sort of rebelled against that. I think that roguelikes, of course, roguelikes existed well before all this, but the reason that they took off, I think, at the time that they did, which was around between the years of, like, you know, 2008 and 2013 or so, somewhere in those, that there was like a good 5 years there where everyone started talking about roguelikes. And I think part of that is this, the I am not a commercial product component of it, that they're so loud and proud about that. And then, you know, developers like Michael Bro, we should maybe talk about him, and Bro's games also communicate this loudly, right? I think. He selects art styles very particularly to be like, this is not something you would see in a commercial game. Interestingly, though, he does make commercial games. But he sort of communicates the aesthetic of a non-commercial game. But yeah, roguelikes, they are not commercial games. And what I was saying was, I had this coder friend, he was a coder who was working on 100 Rogues, and he was a very, like, serious coder guy who, like, really believed in coding and read books about coding, and was like a acolyte of open source. Really believed in, like, the possibilities of, like, open source stuff. And so he was very interested in roguelikes because I think, you know, like, roguelikes point to this possibility of this future of people just making games, small games that can be made by one person, you know, can be made by one person, you know, I want to add, like, reasonably. Because I make games that are completely unreasonable for one person to make. And actually, update, I have some people helping me now. Brick Road is now going to be helping me with Gem Wizard's Tactics because it really is that unreasonable for me to be making the kinds of games that I try to make as one person. It's just, it's like literally unreasonable. I used to be like, yeah, it's unreasonable, and I'm doing it anyway. And it's like, no, it's unreasonable. Like, what that means is you shouldn't do it. Or you can't do it. You will fail. Anyways, I mean, some of these roguelikes take decades to make, even with no graphics at all. That's true, too. Well, that's another thing that's awesome about them. Another really cool quality. Maybe we should put, like, let's make them, like, you know, good and bad qualities. Let's talk about the good first. I usually put the bad first, I feel like. Qualities. Yeah. So it's funny, like, actually, the actual interaction itself is one of the worst things about them, but there are other things about them that's great. Decades to make. Long-term projects. Like, extremely long-term projects. Labors of love that can take decades to finish. DCSS, NetHack. Is there anything else? Come to mind as examples. Tradition also extends to Dwarf Fortress, which again, I don't think ADOM is still being worked on. Wow, those are all still being worked on? That's crazy. ADOM, Tome. Nice. Yeah, that's what's cool too, is that they have a hiatus and then they come back. This aspect of roguelikes is, like, really awesome. Really, beautiful. I mean, these two things, it's funny because like I haven't really thought about roguelikes in this kind of like holistic, like stepping back kind of way in a while. And so generally I go throughout my life like thinking like roguelikes suck. Because of this, and because they're like their gameplay isn't very good. But these sort of meta qualities of them is like really amazing actually. And I would say that this, like in the right hands, could actually lead to eventually them becoming, actually really good. It might take a very long time, but someone we were talking about in the Discord how DCSS is getting rid of their food system, which is like, like that's huge. I mean, that's what we did with Oro. I would like to mention about Oro and how Oro relates to roguelikes. By the way, I propagandistically put a hyphen in roguelikes. Usually, I guess I didn't do it here. But I am very much of the feeling that like we should think of them as games that are like Rogue. I don't see a problem with that. I think that I really think it's good to resist the idea of like the genreification of singular game ideas. Hair Machine says, I feel like most roguelikes are pretty cool and fun in parts when something cool or interesting does happen. That's true. One of the few genres in which that's possible at all. That's right, yeah. So let's talk about that. That's another good thing. Actually are surprising interesting sometimes. I don't know. I want to say like once per hour or so, something interesting happens. Maybe even half an hour, like 30 to 60 minutes. It depends on the game. And this, this is a major bullet point because a lot of games, especially single player games, you can go through the whole thing and nothing surprising or interesting happens. Ever. You can play for 70 hours and not one thing happens that was remotely surprising or interesting. Yeah, power sword dropping doesn't count, but like there are weird things that can happen occasionally. Trying to think of some examples, like I don't know, mutation potion thing. You throw it and it does whatever. AI Dungeon is really good at doing weird things. That's true. That's true. AI Dungeon's weird though because like I almost feel like AI Dungeon is that's like a completely different animal, I think, from roguelike certainly, and it really is all about this AI project, right? Yeah, it's its own system, I guess. So what else can we say? Bad qualities, large swaths of time spent doing rote, obvious actions, auto explore, etc. Whizbane says, is the weird / unique situations a result of consistent rules for game entities? I think that's part of it, or the interactions between objects and tiles, etc. I think it's both. Actually, but I want to say that your thing there about like consistent rules for game entities. Maybe that's not itself a good thing, but I guess maybe we should reword this because that's not the actual good thing, because it's not as though it would be bad to have inconsistencies between yourself and the opponents. What it is these are systemic games. Systemic games that sort of operate by their own rules are not directed to be a necessarily satisfying or smoothly told story as in, you know, one-player console game or something. Yeah, something along though. That's really what it is that they're systems. They're just like a system that's happening, and you can kind of like go in and exist in the system the same way that chess and Go and any really any board game works. There are really systems of rules that you're going in and interacting with in the way that can't be said for a lot of games. Spelunky is a very pure example of that refined. Oh wait, Derek, you talked about this a lot as what he took from roguelikes and applied them to the platformer genre, right? That are very rules based. I don't know how else to put that exactly, but they're systemic. They're rules based. They're machines. They're these little machines that produce different and so in that way they're very inspiring to me. You know, obviously like Clockwork game design and my whole philosophy of thinking about games is very much based in my experience with roguelikes and board games. Those are the two things. And so this, like, I kind of want to just say that they just have bad rules. I just kind of want to say like they have like bad grandfathered in D&D rules, which results in large swaths of time spending rote obvious actions, auto explore, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, the dice rolls. Now the dice rolls are. I'm trying to think of the dice rolls, like the level of randomness, because that kind of goes back to this first thing, right? The level of randomness is there because kind of this, you know, and while they are very systemic games, the systems are not very strong and they're actually super solvable. Let's try add the word solvable. And a need for massive amounts of RNG. Yeah, so I mean and most of my, you know, theory about like what is bad in game design, yeah, so much of my ideas about what is bad in game design comes from my experience in roguelikes. Right? So like output randomness, actor removal, what else? I mean, those are two really big ones. Yeah, I think those are the two big ones from roguelikes, probably. Maybe people can think of other things, but they do kind of have an information horizon in terms of I don't know, they're very inconsistent with their information horizon. Yeah, so they've got a line of sight, like a fog of war thing. But that's a little weird too, because like that works. That is usually a pretty good info horizon. But first of all, I think there are things that can attack you from outside it. Yeah, you can affect stuff outside of it for sure. And also, then there's things like, okay, so like you have item drops, right? And like you could say that item drops are fine from an info horizon perspective because you see the item, then you pick it up, and then like you can take as long as you want before you use it or not. So it's kind of like drawing a card. But the problem is that then when you use a lot of like things like potions, you know, you have like all these random effects that can happen from potions and scrolls, and you have to like figure out the ID system. Yeah, the identification system is very random, very output random, and can lead to you just dying outright. It's ridiculous. So another bad quality of roguelikes is high score. And that's a third thing. One of my, but this is a very fundamental one. Score based goal. I'll put goal in quotes. Ultimately end up functioning more like toys. Which to me is a good case for roguelikes having things like classes. Like, it's one of the things I like about DCSS is the fact that there's like, you can pick your race and you can pick your class. And between those two, like, it adds like a Master of Magic kind of vibe a little bit, where you can like take this weird object and throw it into this weird box and like see what happens, you know? And so in that sense, it's kind of a good toy. Wacky fun stuff, exactly. Says in the game, DCSS has reciprocal line of sight, so you can't be hit if you can't see something. Yes, DCSS is, it's one of the reasons this is one of my favorites, is that they're very like philosophical. They're very like they're not driven by just like whims in the way that a lot of roguelikes seem to be. They're very like they try to have consistent reasons for why they do stuff. Impenetrable UI seems like a common bad quality, or at least a convention of one action per keyboard key. One action per keyboard key is a bad thing? Now, impenetrable UI is definitely a bad quality. And it's not just, impenetrable UI. Also, I mean, actually, that's a fine thing to write down. But more profound is that skill in roguelikes is almost entirely about just learning all the rules. And that's to the extent that they call it, they refer to the rules of the game in roguelikes as spoilers. That's true. It's hard to believe, but it is true. Let's see. Why is there an equip and a wear button on different keys? That's true. That apply to completely different categories. Yeah, and so that's a lot of that grandfathered in stuff. D&D, let's say like old computer game rules, or slash, keyboard driven rules, right? Like, so something like that, the equip and wear and all that stuff, it's just like old PC game shit, It's almost like those old games you had to type in like speak, enter, like the original Ultima, things like that. It is interesting to think and talk about like the original Rogue. I don't know if people have played the original Rogue, but it's good to think about that, especially in the context of, we were talking about Ultima 1 and 2 the other day in chat, and Ultima 1 came out, I believe, in the late 70s, actually, and I can double check that, but let's see, 1980. Okay, interesting. But I think, but before this was another game. It started with an A. Darn it. Alakabeth. Yeah, and this was 1979. Okay. Yeah. And this was like, this was the first, that's right, it had the first person dungeon perspective. So I'm just trying to contextualize the original Rogue. Actually, let's go to list of roguelikes. I wonder if they list Rogue as the first. Oh, they don't list Rogue as the first roguelike. Look at that. I didn't even notice that before. The hell is this? Beneath Apple Manor? We have to play this. Look at this. Can this be the next book club game? What the fuck? There's an apple here? I really want to play this. Alright, we're playing this. Let's just make that a little bigger. Beneath Apple Manor. Wow. What the fuck? See, I'm learning something new here. I did not actually know about this. I want screenshots, please. Atari Mania, maybe? No, I want screenshots, god damn it. Oh wait, did that have tabs? Let's look on YouTube or something. I just have to see this. This is too fucking weird. Also, I'm kind of like mind blown because I thought, I always thought that Rogue was like, look at that. That looks just like Rogues. This looks actually very familiar, so maybe I did know about this and I forgot. Who knew that that song was from Beneath Apple Manor all this time? Yeah, this does look like a lot like Rogue. Actually, it's funny. It looks better than Rogue. It's funny too to look at these like super old roguelikes and notice that like they're like the same as the new ones. Like you're doing the exact same shit. It doesn't change anything. Wow, this is a long fight. Is that the ghost attacks? Get the treasure. Break the lock, of course. Yeah. Find a potion. Do you take it? Why would you not take it? Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a roguelike. I wish there was more apples involved in this, but, is there anything else weird going on in this? Alright, so we got Beneath Apple Manor. D&D, this looks familiar too. And I did know about P-Edit 5, but I forgot all about it. Let's look this up. Let's watch some gameplay. Oh, look at this. You got factions you can pick. Ooh. I like this font too. This looks way better than like a lot of shit that came after it. God, 1975. This is crazy. So wait, is the whole, oh no, here we go. Look at this. What? Oh look, there's like fog of war. It's sort of hard to follow what's going on because it sort of, it looks like, yeah, it just kind of like, okay. Is there sound? I guess there's not sound. But yeah, I mean, this also is just like a roguelike. This is, I mean, it seems more crude, you know, like more cumbersome, but like not really that much. I'm sure you get used to it. That's the thing too. A lot of these games, like these old games, you know, like when you first start playing them, you're like, oh, what the hell is going on? But then you play for a little bit and you're like, oh, okay, it's just, you know, you get used to it. So is D&D and P-Edit 5 the same thing? So okay, anyways, it's worth looking at. It's worth noting these things that they're so old and they're so, you know, it's like kind of such an elemental idea in video games. The idea of like randomly generated dungeon, you go around, fight monsters, collect things. No more birds. Mainframes were beasts compared to home computers until mid 80s. Yeah, that's why these are these weird Play-Doh systems. No more birds. You have to see this. Beneath Apple Manor. Okay? Look at this. Gaze upon it. Pretty sweet, right? I think this should be the next book club game just because of this picture. So he's chained up. There's an apple here. There's some treasure. It's funny, I think they just had like a general fantasy picture. Well, this is like a Halloween background. There's like bats and like this scary manor. And then there's a dragon. And then there's this weird guy holding a candle. I don't know what that is. The dragon is like breathing fire onto his own face, which probably hurts. And he's trying to grab the treasure, which I understand. This is some pretty sweet treasure. But then there's just an apple. And the apple is actually huge, or possibly in the camera. The dragon breathing out the ghost of the Candleman. Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what's happening. He's breathing out fire into the shape of a Candleman. That's you know, it's like people can blow smoke rings. This is a much more advanced technique. And then this ogre guy who looks like a He-Man character. I don't know what he's doing, but I just love this apple. Because you know what? Actually, wait. It's not a camera thing, because look here. This helmet is actually in front of this apple. You see that? Right? It's protruding in front. So actually, these are normal sized helmets, and this is a massive apple. It's a, oh man. All right. So, anyways, oh yeah, we're gonna talk about roguelikes also in a bit. But we talked about some good qualities of roguelikes and some bad qualities of roguelikes. And it's interesting how little actually they've changed, you know, in some ways. I think some of them are more weird and I guess like progressive design-wise than others. But yeah, so that kind of sums up what roguelikes are all about, I think. I do want to talk about Oro a little bit, but first let's talk about roguelites. Hair Machine says, I used to think that roguelike skill was just learn all the rules, but then when I decided I was going to solve DCSS, it turns out that wasn't quite true. There is a mystical skill, I think, as threat detection, which is basically knowing when you will die in enough moves advance to do something about it. Yep, yeah. Based on weighing up all the contributing factors. Yeah, that's true. John Harris listed that as, he would call that the critical moment. Let's see if I can find that article, actually. I think that's what he would call it. What's the name of that website? Game Set Watch? Yeah. Well, I guess he republished it on Game of Sutra or something. Yeah, critical moments. So this is funny. This was written 2010. So this is right around the time when I was becoming friends with John Harris, because I wanted him to teach me and be my sensei of roguelikes. Critical moments. Think of them as hypothetical situations. Here the player has just come down to a stairway. So this is in Rogue, by the way, which, by the way, John Harris would always tell me he thought was like the best roguelike, pretty much, in a lot of ways. In this case, the player seems to be relatively safe, move in 8 directions. There's nothing nearby that can cause him harm. Immediately speaking, it doesn't matter what the player does here. He's free to take whatever actions he feels necessary to secure his character's long-term survival, is because this is not a critical moment. Now look at this situation. Griffins are among the strongest monsters in Rogue. If the player is low level, then a single hit from a griffin could wipe him out. For the sake of argument, let's assume this is the case. Then that makes this a critical moment. If the player doesn't take the right action this turn, the game could end immediately. The right choice must be made to survive. We might borrow a term from chess here and say he is in check, which is appearing not just for the danger of the situation, but because a roguelike character's movement options mirror those of a chess king. When a king is in check, the player must take an immediate action to continue play. There is randomness in Rogue. May die, monster may miss on its attack, etc., etc., etc. But, and I hope he probably goes into it. One of those cases where the player doesn't know if a situation is critical. Rogue doesn't let you see beyond doors until you step into them. That's some pretty bad info horizon right there. Yeah, it's very probabilistic. So what you're talking about, Hair Machine, that like sense of, and that's the thing. So that's the thing that I think undermines actually this argument that I think you're making, Hair Machine, which is this when you say mystical skill of threat detection. It's like, yes, there is this like strategic, you know, like you have all these cues. So it's like, okay, well, I know I have extra strength now, more than I usually do. I know I have this really good armor. I know there's a monster over there and a monster over there and a monster over there. And I know that I'll regen a little health between now and then. So you know all these different rules and you're trying to predict what's going to happen a few turns in advance. And yeah, so like there is that like mystical skill, or like really what we would normally think of as like strategy game skill of being able to make decisions, ambiguous decisions that are like partially informed by the state and everything. But the thing that undermines that is the fact that there's so much randomness too. And so what John Harris is saying here, if you survive in a situation 49 times out of 50, but keep encountering that situation, eventually the dice will roll against you. Even if you just roll once, it's still a 1 in 50 chance of losing. Slim chances come up sometimes. The prize advised not to enter doors at all if he can help it. The rule is he can't help it. Yeah, and that there aren't doors in most roguelikes, but there are door equivalents. Like you know, that stuff is sort of all around there. Heuristic stuff like how close to the stairs you are. Yeah, it's the same as that strategy stuff. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I overstate the case a little bit when I say it's like, well, I did say almost entirely. Now, let me ask you, Hair Machine, when you did you learn all the rules to DCSS? And if you did, like, how far did that get you? You know what I mean? Like, because I'm not saying, you know, I like at certain point, obviously, once you've learned all the rules, then the difference between growing any further or not is going to be something else. But I feel like learning all the rules gets you really, really, really far. In those games, you know what I mean? It's not everything, but I do feel that it is a lot, and which is why they call the rules spoilers. I actually won before I knew anything, like all the rules from learning some systemic stuff like tactics and how powerful stairs are. Okay, I should mention that I don't think I've beaten any roguelikes, including my own. And part of that's because like I really don't like trying to like, you know, like I want to play them in the way that I want to play all strategy games, which is just like just sort of playing it naturally in that sort of playfulness way that Brett Lowy talks about. And so I don't want to like min-max them. I don't want, like, I just have this sense with roguelikes in particular that like I can go look up some stuff and, you know, and I guess like maybe in a way that's like a spoilery kind of thing. But not just look up stuff, but like, I don't want to sit there and like figure out the optimal thing, you know, like, cause I can look at my inventory and be like, okay, this is the optimal thing here. And there's no timer or anything. So you can just kind of like figure it out. A lot of times, Minotaur Berserker. Yeah, I do remember. Was it Minotaur Berserker? I remember that. I remember there was one class, I guess it was that one, that was just like so strong, like so inherently strong. And that's the thing too, is like I didn't want to play that. I wanted to play like these weird, I remember I played this I can't remember the name. Let's look up the DCSS classes. CSS classes. Background. Let's see. So I think I like playing as an assassin and like certain, which one was it? Race combinations, let's see. Spriggan Enchanter. I think that's what I would do. Spriggan Enchanter. Yeah. I liked Spriggans a lot. I used them a lot. Troll Berserker, I remember those too. Using that a lot. Yeah. Oh man, I'm getting excited to play DCSS now. So yeah, I do recommend checking out all of John Harris's work on roguelikes for if you want to learn more about roguelikes and stuff like that. Can we add the playfulness versus min-maxing paradox as a paradox as it relates to strategy games to the discussion list? Sure. Oh, to the, you mean a different topic, like its own day, its own concept day? Playfulness. Yeah, let's do one on that. That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll put it in bold, so we'll do it soon. Yeah. Well, also you should know. I don't know if you read Brett Lowy's stuff on that. I think we did a podcast about it too. But yeah. Okay, Whizbane. I played DCSS yesterday for like 15 minutes and hard noped. Didn't want to climb the mountain of learning to actually get to the good parts. Maybe more a function of how I want to spend free time though. Yeah, I mean, roguelikes. So I assume you haven't played any roguelikes before. Because if you played, they all like they share. If you've learned to play one roguelike, it's easier to learn to play the others, because there's a lot of shared knowledge between them. But yeah, they can be intimidating and stuff at first. But I don't think it's such a mountain of learning. Like, I mean, if you played Diablo, there's also a lot of overlap there. The biggest thing, I guess, is the keys, the hotkeys. Right? Like using the keyboard in that way is, especially if you don't come from like an older PC game background, it's hard to think like, you know, like you kind of got to like, I guess, print out a list of hotkeys or something, you know, like the whole keyboard, things like that. I forgot about that. The impenetrable UI / the keyboard stuff. That is pretty rough for sure. Keys, learning about skills, knowing something about all the hundreds and billions of items. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, can you imagine? Like, it's such a bad new player experience to have like that potions and scrolls system, where like someone's like, "Oh, I found a scroll. Let me use it," and then they just like some fucking random thing happens. Like, that's a horrible idea. Remove item identification too in DCSS. Yeah. They've gotten rid of the most of the really bad effects. That's good. Yeah. Okay, so there's two things I want to talk about before I have to wrap up. One of them is roguelites. So let's get into that, and then I want to talk about Oro and roguelikes as well. So my like gut feeling is like roguelites aren't a thing. You know, like that's where I kind of want to start. Is by saying that that's not actually a real thing. But to be more fair and like more descriptive, I think, because there is clearly something that's being pointed at. Here is the roguelite tag on Steam. So Monster Train, which we recently were playing as a book club game, which is like Slay the Spire. So that is a deck building single player like number reduction genre game, you know. But yeah, it's basically a deck building card game, I guess. Pretty much, you know, because you play out the cards to the table as actors, and then they do attack. It's like Magic the Gathering or whatever. So it's basically a deck building card game. But there's certain things about it that kind of come from a roguelike tradition. Roguelite is proc-gen and match-based permadeath, but beyond that can be anything. Right. So, but that's not even really true. Even what you said is not true. But let's take that as a possibility. I don't think that's true. But I think it's how people think of it. But then it's like inconsistent. Because there are kinds of games that do have proc-gen and match-based, but would never be called roguelites. The main examples that come to mind for me would be you know, like match 3 type games, you know, Tetris type games, that kind of thing. Also like board games, you know. So let's talk about roguelites. What do they actually take from Rogue? Okay, so what do they actually take from Rogue or roguelikes? Well, I guess, you know, the thing is like, so one player match based / permadeath, which is a term that I've always hated. Like you could say, it's interesting because like you could say that they took this from roguelikes, but you could also say that they didn't, because this is, again, when you think of it as just one player match based, it's just a different way of thinking about it. One player match based. So actually, this is a good way of thinking about it. Or permadeath, right? So if we think about it as permadeath, where it's a single player, like, adventure game, almost, game with some avatar who, you know, who dies, and you get and that's game over. Then you could say that that roguelites are inheriting this feature from roguelikes. However, you could instead think of these this pattern as being a one-player extension of the common, you know, pattern in multiplayer games of a match, right? Those are two distinct ways of looking at it. I tend to think that the permadeath way of looking at it is like harmful and confusing and kind of wrong, and especially wrong once you start looking at roguelikes, because like, or roguelites rather, especially because roguelites start to become such a big, broad genre of different kinds of interaction, and like you don't even have an avatar anymore, really. And so to say permadeath, it starts getting further and further away from that idea, because, you know, the original idea with permadeath was, or like the original idea of the term permadeath, because, by the way, I don't think anyone was using the word permadeath in 1980 when Rogue came out. Back then, you know, games were a lot shorter. So let's talk more about permadeath. You know, back when Rogue came out, games were all a lot shorter. Most games, one player or otherwise, were, you know, short and match based, or like, were, let's just say, like, were very short play sessions with no saving or permanence. So permadeath as a concept, I wonder when this first started appearing. Like, I wonder, I'll like Google this term. Let's see what this says. Like, what's the history of this? See, now this is saying most arcade games such as Space Invaders and Pac-Man have permadeath. There's no chance that anyone playing Pac-Man in 1985 or 1990 or probably even 1995 was saying, oh yeah, Pac-Man, the game with permadeath? Nobody was saying that. No one, even today, I don't think anyone would really say that, except for the person who wrote this. Few single-player RPGs exhibit death that is truly permanent as they allow. See, so that's the thing, is like, permadeath assumes a, you know, a post-1990 RPG, like, and other games, console games, kind of like conception. But let me catch up on chat real quick. No one thinks about one-player match-based games, haha, except for us. That's true. I think most people understand permadeath has no restarting, not necessarily your avatar died or whatever. Yeah, I think that's true. Classic arcade games for home consoles were all permadeath. Dang it. Well, that's the thing, and so that's why you didn't need a term for it. All games were permadeath, and again, like also sports in real life are permadeath. You know, traditional ancient abstracts are permadeath, right? No checkpoints or whatever. Games had password systems sometimes. That's true. In terms of art, we developed new terms. No one was calling classical music classical at the time, were they? That's true. Zelda wasn't permadeath. Does it? What? So you're saying the original Zelda had saving? Yeah, that's true. But that's the thing is like when the original Zelda came out and worked that way, that was like right around the time when the idea of like persistent games started to become a thing, right? Like we started having saving games and these longer adventures somewhere in the late 80s, I guess. And then that didn't become like the norm until I guess like probably around somewhere around 1990 or something like that. I hate reading these Wikipedia articles. Like this sentence is such garbage. The subgenre of roguelike games is an exception where permadeath is a high value factor of these games. Like that's just a bad sentence, but also there's many exceptions. I mean, Tetris, you know? There's all kinds of video games that don't have see, like, what is this? Why does it say RPGs? You know, it's like, and it's funny because like it's doing this thing where it's like kind of like laundering in that RPGs are like the normal video game. I think permadeath is literally defined in relation to an RPG. Yeah, I think so too. And because RPGs are so dominant and RPGs sort of like took over all of video games and all video games became like kind of partially RPGs, you know, especially single player games. So, is a concept that only makes sense in a world where basically all games have become you know, persistent RPGs. Basically all, I should say, one-player games, one-player video games have become persistent RPGs. Were it not for that, the concept permadeath, like the term permadeath, would not get used. In the way that it does not get used in sports, it does not get used in even still in like, you know, Tetris, games like that, or tabletop games. Civ and stuff calls it hardcore Iron Man, right? That's true. Which is also another interesting component about these games that we haven't even talked about, which is the hardcore flavor, which I think I might put in the bad qualities category. Hardcore flavor slash gatekeeping element. I think that roguelikes being a part of this, you know, they're non-commercial, which is great. They're like these, a lot of times like open source, they're like these weird little basement games made by one person. And I think that on some level, not maybe consciously, but on some level, you know, all the keys being used for you know, for, we're talking about roguelikes, that's right. Like, you know, the shitty, horrible, impenetrable UI and the how it's hard and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that originally this wasn't the idea. But you know, how do I put this? Like, in the 2010s, era, resurgence, a major a factor that appealed to people was the hardcore flavor gatekeeping element of these games. You know, which I think a lot of people wanted, because in a similar way that, as we talked about with Dark Souls being a response to this like Universal Studios kind of thing. To me, the important part of the hardcore flavor is just so I can personally feel something while playing the video game. Like, I need tension and stuff, otherwise I don't care about what I'm doing. Yeah, but, well, I don't think that's not what I mean by hardcore flavor. I mean, like, I'm almost talking about, like, marketing. I'm not even talking about, like, what's in the game. Because, like, you know, Tetris has what you're talking about, right? Tetris has tension. You have to pay attention, and you are going to, like, you know, you're gonna lose. The well's gonna fill up in Tetris, and you can start, you know, at a high level and you get like that really quickly. But never has part of the marketing, and I know marketing is a weird word because these are non-commercial games, but I just mean like the social layer of like conversation around the games of Tetris has never been really about like how hardcore they are and how you will die and permadeath. I mean, the fact that it's called permadeath, permanent death, that sounds pretty scary and pretty hardcore, don't you think? Like, oh, dude, you play games with permadeath? Holy shit. And then, of course, they were all called Iron Man mode. What was the other one that you said? Hardcore, permadeath. Like, think about all these terms. And it reflects something about what is being valued here. When, you know, like I say, like, they're not any more tense or hard, really, than Tetris or Dr. Mario. But Dr. Mario has the least, you know, like, it's not themed or thought about that way. And I think that's important. Okay, so back to roguelites. Yeah, so what are these things? Oh yeah, what else do these take from... I almost think I should have a section just on permadeath. Permadeath and the hardcore game play. Whatever. That's what we'll call this. And I'll put this down here because it's not really like a sort of its own thing. And then this guy, I also want to be in there too. So yeah, it's a term that only makes sense in the context of a world where everything is this long RPG. So what do roguelites take? So they take the one-player match-based or permadeath. I don't think we should think about it as permadeath personally for some reasons that I've listed. Blah, blah, blah. But if you think of it as one-player match-based, it's like, you know, I mean, technically Tetris is... I'm trying to get at, like, why do I think roguelites are not a thing? However, if we use, you know, one-player match-based, then pinball, Tetris, and many solitaire tabletop games, you know, are just as... then, you know, should also be considered roguelites. Pinball isn't proc gen, that's true. Well, we haven't talked about... Well, we're just talking about the one-player match-based right now, though. You know, or should meet this roguelite standard. That's... And pinball doesn't have that, but Tetris does. And many solitaire games, you know, Klondike. Let's write that. You know, Klondike Solitaire absolutely has proc gen. Tetris has proc gen. And like someone might be like, well, no, I mean like a map, but it's like, no, but you know, a lot of these games don't have randomly generated maps. I don't think Monster Train has a map at all. It's a card game. And so you could actually say that Monster Train has more in common with Klondike than it does with Rogue. You know, maybe that's a good way of putting it. Like, Monster Train has more in common with Klondike than it does with, come on, that's not a map though. I know that's like, yeah, that's not a map. That's really just like a, do you want this bag of goods or do you want this bag of goods? Like it's like, it literally should just be two, you know, like two big buttons, like the Gem Wizard's Tactics mission selector. Stop calling me spam bots. Than it does with Rogue. Does anyone disagree with this statement? I'm curious, because to me this kind of points out the issue. Without that, it would literally not be considered a roguelite, I think, without the kind of forward progression between series. Well, think about shoot, FTL or Strange Adventures. No, not Strange Adventures. What was the other one? Forward progression between a series of encounters that give the adventure feeling. Okay, that's good. Let's talk about that. That actually might be the thing. That might be the thing. Let's try this out. Okay. Definition. And I think there is a definition online that we can look at, but like a 1P match-based game with procedural generation that sort of like expresses the feeling of an adventure. Something like that. Because I do actually think that's kind of important, and that's what makes Tetris not a roguelite. And that's what makes, you know, one player like Klondike not a roguelite, right? Is that narrative layer that has a narrative layer of adventure. And so for me, as someone who's like very much all about rules and stuff, like that's not, you know, terribly relevant necessarily to the rule set or the system itself, but it is, you know, I think that is a big part of like what makes up that genre. Something analogically. Wow, I feel like I've never seen that word before. Analogically. Is that how you say that? Analogically? Like going down dungeon levels. Yeah. Yeah, going down dungeon levels, crossing a map, that kind of thing. I think that's actually what makes them. And let's take a look at these roguelikes. So Hades has that. Noita definitely has that. Slay the Spire, of course. Some of these I haven't played. I'm sure Dead Cells has that. Yeah, and so okay, I'm more at peace with this, knowing that, having some kind of like sensible definition for the term. I also think another aspect of roguelites are, let's just write like from a rules perspective. I also think part of it is marketing. Trying to sell the idea that it's like roguelites want some of the glamour of roguelikes. Trying to capture some of the glamour. It's a very particular kind of glamour of roguelikes. The hardcore, you know, basement produced indie. And I think we should also talk about indie and how that term and that like aesthetic of development appeared around the same time as the roguelike. Indie as an aesthetic is very tied in with the roguelike tradition. Are roguelikes and roguelites different? Yes. Roguelikes are games that are like Rogue. I mean, they largely are. So here's a list of them, right? They're all top-down, you know, map generation. You move a little guy around, turn-based, almost always. And then roguelites are completely different kinds of games. They can be basically anything. And all they are is a one-player match game with procedural generation that has a narrative layer of adventure. Now, I think we could probably find some examples of games that do these things, and we still wouldn't maybe call them roguelites. I don't know, but I do think that part of it is marketing. Like as I say, I think that it's because, you know, roguelites, roguelites are like, I want to say strictly commercial. Like, I'm trying to think, like, I feel like, I'm sure there are some non-commercial roguelites. Maybe, was Dream Quest, was that free? I don't think that was free, actually. But they come off to me as much more, like, commercial products than, now I'm looking on the Steam page, so, Dream Quest was only $3. I mean, well, still. That's cheap, for sure, but it's still a commercial product. I think that there is a difference between something like these roguelikes, which are just like sort of like inherently free, and I guess like the existence of art is a big part of that, because people, I guess, know that art costs money on some level. There's tons of non-commercial roguelikes. Like 90% of all games that come out no one's ever heard of. Yeah, that's probably true. Well, here's the difference though. In the popular conception of these things. So, what are the most popular roguelikes? NetHack, Dungeon Crawl, Brogue, right? The popular conception of roguelikes are these big free, like inherently free concepts. They're not, you know, games that are not for sale, never have been for sale, will never be for sale. I think they will never be for sale. At least that's kind of how it feels. Whereas, yeah, I'm sure there are free roguelites, but it's different for something to be free and for something to be, you know, maybe it's like, it's sort of related to this open source idea. Roguelikes feel free in a way that, like, if I were to, like, I just made Chess Mix free, and, oh, that's actually an interesting case study, Chess Mix. Is Chess Mix a roguelite? I guess it probably is, because it has the overmap. Maybe. I'm not sure. But anyway, I made that free, but it's still like, and I guess maybe part of it's just like the art, the fact that it has art and stuff, so people would feel like, oh, this is a commercial game that was made free, is given out for free, whereas roguelikes feel like non-commercial games that are also free. And I think that the art is a big part of that. I think open source is kind of a part of that. Yeah, like these are very proprietary. Cool. So I think that's good. What else? Anything else? I think that's it that roguelikes have in common with Rogue. Roguelites have in common with Rogue. So I quickly just want to talk about Oro, I think, and how it relates to roguelikes. Because Oro is interesting. It's not a roguelike, and it's not a roguelite either. Oro was like, and I still feel like it is, like I wanted to, so we're talking about Dungeon Crawl and how they're like, let's try removing food entirely. I remember thinking back in 2011, 2010, 2011, I remember thinking like, you know, trying to think, how could we like boil down roguelikes to some kind of like essential quality? And what I did do that, and the early versions of Oro were just, they had no stats or anything like that, no random RNG in the attacks, and it was extremely boring. And it was just like literally like you would walk up, and then a rat would walk, and you would hit it, and it would die. And it was very, it was like I had boiled it down to like just the very essential qualities, and it was extremely boring. Someone like Darren Gray from Roguelike Radio would definitely say Oro is a roguelike, I think. Interesting. But others would not. It's going out of the genre for sure into something else. Yeah, I would not say it's a roguelike. I mean, there's so much. Let's look at that Berlin interpretation again. Let's see which of these Oro has. Has this. I guess it has this, as much as I don't want to play ball with this evil term. It is turn-based. It is grid-based. It is entirely non-modal. Uh-oh, it's looking more and more like a roguelike. It definitely has complexity. Now, it doesn't have resource management, really. Certainly, and in the way that you would see it in a roguelike. Like, it really doesn't have that. You would argue that it is a roguelite. Interesting. See, and that's another annoying thing, is that, like, roguelite suggests that it would be a game that's like Rogue, but light. You know, it's like easier to use and easier to play. Like 100 Rogues maybe should be a roguelite, because it's got simpler stat systems, it's got easier input mechanisms. Sheeran maybe even could be maybe a roguelite. But that's not what roguelite refers to. Definitely has resource management, health and cooldowns. Like, that's very borderline. And it doesn't really have exploration and discovery either, because it's all, it's very homogenous in that sense, especially in 2.0. But anyway, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 9, and 7 out of the 9 we can cleanly give to Oro. So by this interpretation, how about these low value factors? We do have this. This is not true, I would say, probably. I mean, it's a little true. I guess it's kind of true. Definitely tactical challenge. Not this. Numbers. Okay, we did that. Yeah. Dungeons, and we did that. So, okay, I guess Oro is, by the Berlin interpretation, Oro is a roguelike. I had not realized that till now. But anyway, my idea with Oro was, well, it was actually, my idea with 100 Rogues was the same thing. I was like, I like these roguelikes, but I feel like they're impenetrable. Who was it earlier in the chat who was like, I can't fucking do this. This is insane. Yeah, Whizbane said, I played DCSS yesterday for 15 minutes and had hard noped. And it's like, that's a shame, you know, and I totally get it. Like, that's a very reasonable reaction. So with 100 Rogues, I was like, let's make like super simple input mechanism, blah, 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 blah. And I think that worked decently well, but then it still was just a roguelike though. And so to me, Oro feels like, you know, thinking like a bunch of steps ahead in terms of like, it's funny because like when somebody's working on a roguelike, I end up like making suggestions that just try to like turn it into Oro again, kind of, because I think like, so something like food system, something like how to do the score system and how to, you know, how to make the score system like something that you can actually like understand and conceive of, rather than just being like this spray of numbers that hits you at the end. How to do, you know, tactics and make tactics interesting. How to use the map, right? Like you have this big ass grid in these roguelike levels, and just so much of it is just completely wasted. There's just nothing going on in most of it. How to think about combat, something like combat, a combat system that that contributes to the tactical complexity rather than taking away from it. So in Rogue, or in any roguelike, you know, the most boring thing you can do is just attack, 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 kill. right? Like that's the most boring thing, and it's also the most efficient thing that you should do almost all of the time. Almost all of the time. And so like, you know, thinking more about like now I think that Oro can still be taken a lot further, and I'm excited to, you know, we may have an opportunity going forward to think about how we can continue to push Oro forward. There's some areas like we made the in terms of like once I started getting wise to the idea of actor removal, we made the whole thing where, you know, when you kill monsters, they turn into power tiles or they turn into monster tiles, thereby changing the level permanently. But to me, that's like maybe just like a beginning of that. Like maybe there's a lot more that can be done with that. The score system. It is good that Oro's score system is not just this spray of points like in roguelikes. It's very clear where all of your points came from, and I think that's important. Ideally, I'd love to just get away from a score system completely. That's the ambitious move, but the less ambitious move is to, you know, like what I do want to do and intend to do is make it so, especially at the higher levels, the scores start getting the scores actually scale up higher and higher and higher, and so, you know, if you're playing at like rank 20 or 18 or whatever, the matches are like over an hour long, which is not what I ever wanted. So yeah, that we didn't even talk about. There's a lot of other bad qualities of roguelikes. Another one is as you get better at the game, you are punished with a much longer and longer and longer match with more and more boring part in the beginning. We didn't even talk about that. That's a big one. So yeah, I think that roguelikes have a lot of really good lessons for anyone making any kinds of games. But particularly if you're making anything like a roguelike, I think it's cool to think about how you could take like not just 1 or 2 steps ahead, as I think Dungeon Crawl is doing, but like 10 steps ahead, 20 steps ahead. Like what, you know, ultimately what might this look like? That is definitely game dependent because roguelikes do not necessarily have a sane difficulty curve which goes from easy to hard. Yeah, that's true. Well, DCSS is hardest right at the beginning. Yeah, but then that falls off fast and then you get like kind of a normal curve again, don't you? And of course there's randomness in that curve itself. A lot of times roguelikes kind of have a curve. Pardon me. They kind of have a curve, but then there's just like all of a sudden this like crazy spike. Yeah, and a lot of it's just like, oh, some like rare, really hard monster just spawned, and now the game is hard all of a sudden. Most of it's comfortable, then you get to play parts with, yeah. So in any case, like, yeah, maybe you're right that it's not there, but there's just a lot of downtime. And I guess that goes back to this. But I still think, though, that even though what you're saying is true, like that for experienced players, the first few levels, like, are not that hard. You know, shit can happen, and you have fewer tools in the early levels to do something about it. But I think that they still are largely those first bunch of levels are just like, you just kind of got to power through them. All right, so this was pretty much all I wanted to talk about today with roguelikes. We are playing Dungeon Crawl now for the book club, and so if people are interested, I hope that people can join us. You can you can find it for free and you know, download it, and you should do that. It's over at crawl.devels.org, and hey, you can play online. Oh, it looks like the art's been updated since I last saw it. Very cool. Yeah. You don't need to know my... Oh, you need my location? Oh, I see. I see why. Cool. What is all this crap? Can I play the game? Oh, do you have to log in now? Is that a new thing? I don't remember that being the case. Anyways, you can also just download it. It'd probably be easier. But yeah, thanks for watching, y'all. And I'll be on the Discord. And stay tuned for more Oro updates. I'm having a Dino Farm meeting tonight where we're going to talk about what is the game plan going forward for Oro. All right. Well, thank you so much. And if you have any more comments, thoughts, I will post this thingy in the chat. And yeah, thanks for joining me. Hair Machine, No More Birds, Prinny Carrot, Ryan Bowles, and everyone else. Whizbane, thanks for chilling. I'll see you next time.